Hello everybody, welcome back to AMTV News. My name is Topher Morrison. It is Tuesday, June 25th, 2013. And guess who we have as a special guest in our country? That's right, Edward Snowden, infamous NSA leaker. So kids, what have we learned? Don't trust the American patriots. No. In our first story in finance and economic news, what is public banking? Many of you know by now the Federal Reserve is not a public bank. So what is? Well, the system provides at-cost public credit. And as we all know, or should, monetary reform is a sexy topic these days after Ron Paul and the revolution and the third great political awakening. The often asked question is, what happens when the Federal Reserve is abolished? Well, according to public banking proponents, at-cost credit, rather than forms of usury which provide profit to the lender, money is seen under this system as a public commodity. In fact, it is argued all of Western civilization is based on it. Thousands of years ago, Pisistratus, the ancient Greek tyrant, used it to great effect to build the ancient world. Today, North Dakota, it is argued, while reaping the benefits of the great Bakken oil reserve, is the only state in the nation with continuing budget surpluses. Not necessarily because of the black gold, but because it is the only state with a public bank. For you conservatives out there, I already know what you're thinking. You want us to nationalize the banks? Pump the brakes there, Haas. North Dakota has a Republican governor and a supermajority in both the House and the Senate, outnumbering Democrats 3-1. It's a nonpartisan issue, or at least it should be. Public banking seeks to end massive debt slavery and the national debt, transfer power from the elite banking syndicates to the local level, end abject poverty, build critical infrastructure, and according to proponents, end our perpetual overseas wars. If they're right, it's a debate worth having, is it not? Visit publicbankinginamerica.org for more information. Now we're in our next story. In geopolitical news, snowfall, the U.S. versus the world. Kind of feels that way, doesn't it? Glenn Greenwald, the now uber-famous journalist who broke the NSA super scandal, had to defend himself over the weekend and again yesterday from accusations that he was aiding and abetting treason.
Glenn, you got into a debate yesterday with David Gregory of NBC News, who essentially said you've aided and abetted Edward Snowden.
To the extent that you have aided and abetted Snowden, even in his current movements, why shouldn't you, Mr. Greenwald, be charged with a crime?
I think it's pretty extraordinary that anybody who would call themselves a journalist would publicly muse about whether or not other journalists should be charged with felonies. The assumption in your question, David, is completely without evidence, the idea that I've aided and abetted him in any way.
Fox News Channel's James Rosen encouraged his leaker to give him documents and set up what he thought was a secret way to email him. I'm not going to launch any accusations at you, Glenn, but did you do anything beyond what James Rosen did in terms of communication with Snowden? Did you work with him to get him a job at Booz Allen? Did you advise him on how to transfer the documents?
The reason I've been reluctant to answer that question up until this point is because the theory on which those questions are based, and I'm not suggesting you're embracing it, but you're referencing the theory that others have embraced, is really quite pernicious, that if you're a journalist and you work with your source and cooperate with them in obtaining documents that you think ought to be released to the public, that somehow that's called aiding and abetting. I call that investigative journalism. There is no investigative journalist on the planet who doesn't work cooperatively with their sources in order to obtain the information they need to inform their readers.
This guy is definitely a laser. Anyways, Snowden, after pulling a little bait and switch, is now in Mother Russia. With the time spent with two of U.S.'s strategic rivals, some are painting Snowden with a treasonous brush. Here is Rachel Maddow's take.
All countries spy on each other. Charging him with espionage seems like it makes it less likely that China would send him back. Asking another country to extradite somebody for that specific crime, that's a difficult thing to ask. Putting that charge out there in public on Friday before American authorities had Mr. Snowden in custody seems like it might have been a strategic mistake. Why did the U.S. do that? That said, China saying that the espionage charge made it impossible for them to arrest Snowden might just be another Chinese excuse. They might not have been planning on arresting him at all, no matter what he was charged with. The Chinese government rather seems to be enjoying the fact that one of the things he's leaked about is the U.S. spying on China. So now they get to crow about that publicly and say the U.S. is a hypocrite for complaining about Chinese spying since America is spying on them. And then they let the guy who let everybody know the spying information get away.
The analogy is also apropos. The U.S. has styled itself a world's policeman, spending what will amount to trillions of dollars on ham-fisted attempts to combat terrorism, all while funding it, when it is in our myopic and transient interest to do so. How hilarious is it that we are now running through the streets, blowing our whistle, and nobody is there to help? Is it ironic or painfully predictable? Now in our next story in health and spirituality news, I'm really starting to like this guy. Before the election of Pope Francis, I came out with some analysis of the Catholic Church. I called it the Rube Goldberg salvation machine, essentially calling out the liturgy, extravagance, and ritual evidently required in the Catholic religion. Relics, in my view, of a superstition best left in the past. But these days, Pope Francis, a product of that church I tend to criticize, has blown me away. From washing people's feet to now ditching a classical concert and the pomp of the papal armchair to focus on the business of the church is admirable. But most importantly, humble and sends a clear signal to all of Christendom. Austerity is not always a bad thing, especially when it's at the expense of extravagance. Capturing every corner of this alternative media, watch AMTV News Monday through Friday. Got an interesting tip or an interesting news clip? Shoot me an email at tophermorrison@amtvmedia.com. Follow me on Twitter at AMTV News and like me on Facebook at The Real Topher Morrison. Find more source material and more videos like these at AMTV Media and greenwave.com. Both are part of the AMTV network. This is AMTV News, the voice of independence.